What's up, butt nuggets? So today we're talking about training for strength versus training for size. Now, before we get into things, keep in mind they are about 80 to 90% similar for most people. There isn't a big difference, okay? There are some minor differences, but on the whole, if you are training for strength, you are training for size. If you're training for size, you are training for strength. There is a very, very big overlap, and a lot of people think you need some specialized program to get one or the other. For most people, you can do both at the same time. So in this video, we're going to talk about rep range, exercise selection, a whole bunch of factors. I will put my notes on the screen so you can read them, and there are also going to be timestamps in the description below so that you can actually find what you are looking for if you're interested in a specific topic. So in this video, I'm going to set it up strength and size together, comparing them together. I think that's a better way of doing things rather than going through all the factors for strength and all the factors for size, just so you can get a better comparison. So first, we're going to talk about rep ranges. For strength, rep range is very important, and lower reps are going to be what immediately and dramatically affects your strength. If you're doing a set of 10 or a set of 15, in terms of your strength, your 1 rep max, as traditionally defined, that's not really going to do that much for your strength. However, it is worth noting that a lot of strength athletes, some very strong people, some very famous strength athletes, like Dan Green, for example, they will do higher reps sometimes. They might stick to the 3 to 6 rep range for heavy compounds, but on the more accessory type of movements, they'll do sets of 8, sets of 10, sets of 12. I've seen Dan Green do sets of like 15 to 20 on squats and on isolation movements as well. And so sometimes strength athletes, their training looks suspiciously like a bodybuilder. So there's a little bit of gray area there, and it's going to vary based on system. The Russian system is going to be mostly, like if you look at Shaiko, if you look at, to a lesser extent, Smolov, they're going to be mostly low reps. And they might be like 70 or 80% with, sets of 3, sets of 6. Just doing those low reps, achieving technical mastery of the lift. And, that rep range is going to be what dramatically and immediately impacts your strength. When training for size, you can gain size from sets of 3 to sets of 30. So you have a much wider range that you can use. Honestly, to a lesser extent than strength, size training, it doesn't matter what rep range you do. You can do sets of 20, sets of 15, 30, 5. As long as you are going close to failure, the actual rep range, the actual number of reps that you get doesn't really matter. I think it's important, if you're a strength athlete, not to only do singles. A single is the most specific thing you can do, but it might not be the most efficient way and the most effective way and the safest, most high risk reward way to actually increase your strength. If you look at most strength athletes, they do reps most of the year. Occasionally they max out, they might do a single at 90 or 95%, but they're not maxing out all the time every single workout. They're doing what it takes to build their strength. And for most people, that's going to be reps. That's going to be a lot of work, 3 to 6 rep range, maybe even up more as well sometimes. So don't think that just because you're training for strength, you have to do only low reps. I think that's a big trap, and that's a very easy way to get injured as well. On the other hand, if you're a size athlete, whatever the fuck that means, I guess a bodybuilder, don't think that you should only do like 8 to 12 reps. I see a lot of programs where they're doing like 3 sets of 10 reps for every single exercise, every single movement. They never go below that specific rep range, and I think a lot of bodybuilders can actually benefit from doing occasional lower reps and getting stronger. So there's quite a bit of overlap as you see here, and I think both sides can learn from the other way of training. Next, let's talk about exercise selection. Now, in terms of strength, typically we're talking about squat, bench, deadlift. I think those are going to be the main things that people are focused on. Maybe snatch and clean and jerk if you're more of a weightlifter focused. Maybe strict curl if you're a bro. But other than that, most people aren't really talking about 1 rep max strength. If you get stronger at lateral raises, okay, do the 10 rep range, 10 to 15, whatever. But don't do a single on lateral raises or dumbbell press or any of these movements. It's not really going to be conducive for long-term gains. And it's not even possible, okay? Don't do a 1 rep max row, okay? That is asking for injury, and it's not a good idea. I actually used to teach English at that school right there, like 7 or 8 years ago, and it's always so fucking weird walking past it. Just kind of a surreal experience. Anyway, So if you're focused on strength, you're going to be focused on squat, bench, deadlift probably, or some other low rep movement that is going to be suitable for low reps, which is not going to be every single movement. Check my book for a lot more details on which movements you can actually max out on. It is definitely not all of them, but you're basically going to have the bulk of your training be those specific movements or very close variations. Before you add something to your strength program, ask yourself, how is this going to make me better? How is this going to help? Is it correcting a weakness? Is it preventing injury? And that's about it. If you're adding variety for variety's sake, it might not actually be smart because you want everything to be as specific as possible. Strength is mostly neurological. So it is your brain and your muscles combined together to lift the most weight. Therefore, if you're adding too much variation, you're not going to get optimal results. If you look at the Soviet weightlifters, often they didn't do a ton of variety, like the Bulgarian system, for example. I think Siam Nulib, this guy, he said he did like 6 movements maybe. I think front squat, maybe back squat a little bit, but not that much. Clean and jerk, snatch, power cleans, and power jerks. Like that was about it, nothing else. And that's because he wants to get as good at those movements as possible, and his training needs to be incredibly specific. So the more advanced you are, the more you have, Olympic golds in mind, the more specific your training needs to be. So if you're a powerlifter, I would say try to make your program as simple as possible and as specific as possible. Don't add in a ton of variety unless you actually need it to progress. I've had instances, and I'm not even really a powerlifter at all, that'll be a future video, but I've had instances where I added in some accessory and I was like, oh my God, this is gonna blow up my squat or blow up my bench or whatever. And then I didn't bench or squat for a little while. And then I came back to the normal movement and I actually got weaker. I thought I would get stronger, but I actually got weaker because this different movement had zero carryover whatsoever. So if you're training for strength, be aware that it needs to be very, very specific. Also keep in mind that training for size doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a ton of variety. You should have more than when training for strength, for sure. You probably need to train the arms a bit more, the shoulders a bit more, calves, if you care about that, that kind of thing. Just because powerlifting training does leave some weak points for most people. But you also want to make sure that you let the central nervous system adapt to the movements that you're using in your program. If you are consistently and constantly changing things up, you might not actually gain muscle because your central nervous system is always adapting and it's hard to make progress. Now let's talk about tempo and mind-muscle connection. If you look at bodybuilders versus powerlifters, often they will do the movement, the same exact movement, in a slightly different way. Bodybuilders will often be more controlled, more focused. They will try to develop a mind-muscle connection. They'll try to go for that sick contraction bro. I believe that's the technical term for it. And they will really try to slow things down and really just focus on what they're doing, getting an internal connection. So they have an internal focus, they're focused on the muscle, not necessarily the weight. Whereas powerlifters, they will often lift more explosively and they are trying to use momentum. Okay, that's the biggest difference between powerlifting and bodybuilding. A bodybuilder is trying to make the movement difficult. They're trying to focus on the muscle and focus on actually making the movement more difficult. Whereas a powerlifter is only interested in poundage. So on the bench press, they might get a huge arch. They might try to, touch their ass to their head to get a short range of motion to improve their leverages to lift the most weight. Whereas a bodybuilder, they probably won't do that because they are interested in the pectorals. I believe that's a technical term for it as well. And this is a very, very big difference. You can sort of do both, but if you're doing one at the extreme, you're gonna miss out on the other benefits that can help the other focus. And this is another area where I think a powerlifter can learn from a bodybuilder and vice versa. If you're a powerlifter, maybe you should learn to control the movement a little better. Maybe don't always take a huge arch in the bench press. Maybe go a little bit deeper in the squat than you need to sometimes, as this can probably be better for hypertrophy, and this can carry over to powerlifting at a later date. It is an investment in yourself. By building this muscle, you can use it later once you are nervously adapted, and you can actually get a better result in the future. If you're a bodybuilder, you can maybe sometimes focus on lifting a little bit more weight, being a little bit more aggressive with the concentrics, and this has been shown to actually help strength a little bit, a lot actually, and this can actually help your long-term results as well. Now, in terms of failure, or RPE, or RIR, or however you want to call it, basically how close you are going to failure, how hard you are pushing each set, often the bodybuilder will go closer to failure. The powerlifter will often keep 2, 3, even 4 reps in the tank. I've seen a lot of programs that use like 70 or 80% of your 1 rep max for sets of 3, 4, 5, 6. For most people, that is not really going to be close to failure. If you take the sumo deadlift, I can do 80% of my 1 rep max for like 20 reps. And on paper in a program, I see like 5 reps or 6 reps. So for me, I find that to be too easy. I find that actually to be, not actually very stimulatory. But for better strength athletes who are more fast twitch, this might actually be appropriate. And part of this is just the exercise selection. If you're doing like a lateral raise or some kind of curl or a machine, like a lot of bodybuilders do, you can push this closer to failure. So machines, isolation work, safer variations, you can naturally push closer to failure. Whereas if you're doing a squat or a bench press, honestly, going to failure is a very bad choice for obvious reasons. But even then, going 1 rep before failure is very taxing, okay? You can blow a pec, especially if you're doing lower reps. Weird stuff can happen in the squat as well. The deadlift, they are naturally more stimulatory, but also more stressful exercises on the joints primarily, but also in terms of inflammation, in terms of the central nervous system, etc. The peripheral nervous system is also a big one. And so you have to realize pushing a set of squats to actual failure is going to be a lot more stressful than like a leg extension or a leg curl or some other, smaller, less stimulatory exercise. And this is a big part of the reason why most powerlifters don't train quite to failure. And I think a lot of them actually, they don't assess their own RPEs very accurately. I've seen people who are like, that's an RPE 9, and the bar speed was still very fast on that last rep, and they probably could have gotten more. They've just gotten in this mindset where they are always holding back. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It might actually be optimal for them. Which takes us to volume. Volume is going to be correlated with both strength and size, but it's going to be much more important for size. If you are training for size, you don't necessarily need to do high volumes, but studies consistently show that doing higher volumes can help. Now, I don't always believe these studies. If they say like, the subjects did 7 sets of squats to failure 3 times per week. Okay. Okay, sure they did. I'm sure they did squats to actual failure. No, most of these studies actually use volitional failure. Obviously, they're not like whipping the subjects. So the subjects actually just go until they don't want to go anymore, which for most people is like fucking 5 reps away from failure, because most people train like pussies. And so these studies I don't always really believe. If you're going like 5 reps away from failure, of course, a huge amount of volume is going to be better than a small amount of volume because you're not really stressing the body that much. But generally speaking, volume is going to be more important for size. Strength, the most important thing is progression. You can do 1 set and get strength gains. And you can get, size gains as well if you're a beginner. But past a certain point, you probably need more volume. For strength, really progression is going to be everything. If you're not progressing week to week in load, something is very wrong, and that needs to be the major focus, because that is going to be what is most specific to your goals. Whereas with size, you can often not be fully recovered for a workout and still get a lot out of it. Just because you're not progressing in load doesn't mean you're not actually doing something useful. Whereas with strength training, if you're not progressing in weight on the bar, you're really not going to be doing something highly productive. It's not to say you can't get better, but it's probably not going to be a good choice. In terms of specific volume recommendations, that's going to be so individual. You can contact me for a custom plan, and I could ask you like 40 questions about what is going to be suitable for you, but I can't like say 12 sets of squats per week or 6 sets of deadlifts. It's really, really hard to say what is going to be optimal for strength or size. Also, you need to really go by feel. Even if you have a coach and they prescribe you a certain amount of volume, if you do that volume and you feel like just fucking destroyed, it's probably too much. If you feel like it's a total joke, either push the sets harder or add more sets, depending on your goal, strength, or size. But either way, it needs to be adaptable week to week, otherwise you're probably not going to get very optimal results. Beware of snakes and bees. Holy shit. There you go. Snakes and bees. Be careful. In terms of progression, I find that strength, powerlifting, you set your goal at a meet and then you sort of work back from there. I think that's probably the best way to do it. And you have certain numbers, certain percentages, certain RPEs that you want to hit. Whereas with bodybuilding, I find that it's a little bit more simple. It's just either do more or get stronger as you can. It's more intuitive, it's more by feel, and it's less structured. It's just a less structured approach, and you are not focused on the numbers as much as just doing better and feeling the muscle and progressing as best you can. Whereas powerlifting, especially at a high level, it is very structured, very regimented. Often people have numbers that they want to hit planned months or even years in advance. And so this is a very, very different mentality and a totally different approach. And this shows up in the exercise split, in how you spread your training across the week. If you are a strength athlete, like a powerlifter, let's recenter this shit. If you are a strength athlete, a powerlifter, you're usually going to set your week up by movement. So you say, okay, I'm going to do squat and bench this day, then deadlift this day, then only squat, and then another squat and bench day, and then a bench only day. You set it up by movement, and then you might add some accessories to complement that movement with it after the main movement. If you are a bodybuilder, you might do upper lower. You're doing upper some days, lower some days. You might do push pull legs, split it up that way. There's full body. There's a lot of different ways to split it up, but it's usually going to be based on body part, on a specific muscle or a group of muscles, not a specific movement. If you're a bodybuilder, you probably don't have a bench day or a deadlift day or a squat day. In fact, there are plenty of bodybuilders who don't even do those movements just because they're not really going to be suitable for their specific goals. You don't have to squat if you're a bodybuilder. If you're a powerlifter, you kind of do, because that's a third of the sport. And so this is a completely different way of thinking. And if you have a leg day and you're a bodybuilder, you might not squat. If you have a back day, you might not deadlift. If you have a chest day, you might not bench. These are good movements, but they might not be ideal for everyone, especially if you have an injury history or some specific structural concerns, or if you just don't like doing them. If you don't like deadlifting, you don't have to deadlift, okay? There's no rule of the gym that says you have to do a certain movement. But if you're a powerlifter, you kind of do. It's also worth noting that the more of a beginner you are, the more this doesn't matter at all, okay? If you're a beginner, you can be getting stronger and bigger at the same time, and you absolutely should. I think it's probably not possible for someone to get bigger and not stronger, or stronger and not bigger, if they're a beginner. And even an intermediate, I would say absolutely you can and should do both at the same time. If you're more advanced, this is where going down a specific road might actually, be possible. If you want to be a professional bodybuilder and then a professional powerlifter, you look at Stan Efferding, you look at Larry Wheels, these people who are both really fucking strong and have also competed in bodybuilding, and their training is different at those times. I think steroids actually changes things a bit. If you look at most steroid users, they do like a pump style of training, higher volume, partial range of motion, that kind of stuff, which I'm not really that into. But if you're natural, there might still be some small differences based on your training, based on your goals. So if you want to compete in powerlifting, your training is going to be much more specific to squat, bench, deadlift. If you're more interested in size, you can still do those, but you're probably going to have to supplement with other movements as well. Finally, a note about diet. If you are interested in aesthetics, in bodybuilding, you cannot get too fat in the off season. If you're going up to like 20% body fat for a man, for a woman it's fine because flotation devices, etc. But if you're a man going up to 20% body fat, if you need to cut down to like 5 or 6% body fat to be competitive at a natural bodybuilding competition, you're going to have a tough time. Whereas if you're a powerlifter, you can afford to get a little bit rounder, huskier in your approach, just because there's no real, there's weight classes, sure, but you don't need to get super lean. You can do a water cut, you can just get down to a higher body fat percentage, still lean, but not super shredded. And, that is going to be a better way to go about things. So in terms of your diet, often a bodybuilder will have to be more regimented, stricter, whereas powerlifters will get a bit of a bulking belly. I think it's called a power belly. Again, technical terms here, A power belly can actually help you lift more, improve your leverages in the squat, in the bench press. So I think that is a big factor. Whereas if you're a bodybuilder, you're interested in aesthetics, a power belly is not going to help you at all. Now, if you want to do both, I think that's possible. It's called power building. Not necessarily body lifting, I guess that's calisthenics, but you can do both at the same time, as these athletes have shown. Can you do both at the exact same time? Maybe, but probably not at 100% of your genetic capabilities, just because you have to sacrifice something somewhere. I would say the best way to go about things is to do a powerlifting base structure and then subtract some squat, bench, deadlift volume and put that in for arms, for shoulders, for more like higher rep type of movements. That is going to be the best way to do it. You could take a bodybuilding plan and focus more on squat, bench, deadlift. On like a push day, you're doing bench. On a pull day, you're doing maybe deadlifts. On a leg day, you're doing squats, etc. And I think that can work as well. It really just depends on which is your primary goal. If you want to do exactly 50-50, just experiment, see what works for you. I realize that's not a very satisfactory answer, but it's the best one there is. All right, that is basically one loop of the park done. This is basically my cardio. You would be surprised at how hard walking up hills while talking, while holding a camera, and trying to appear not to breathe hard and thinking about what you're saying at the same time. It's like so many tasks all at once. It's basically CrossFit. I'm doing CrossFit right now. You're doing CrossFit with me. We're doing CrossFit. Fuck this. Anyway, that is all for this video. Make sure to like the video. Maybe it helps the algorithm, makes me feel good. That means something, right? Strokes my ego, which is nice. Oh my god, I got 200 likes on a video online. Amazing. Notifications on. It does help you to find all the videos, etc. And I will see you in the next video.
Peace! He walks, he talks, delivering the information. Getting swole is the goal, or getting a baller total. Helping you what to do. Jeff's the hero you always dreamed of, dropping knowledge bombs like Hiroshima. Wait, what?